It's time to talk about the Fat Albert movie. For those who don't know, whenever we do something like this, we take a look at something that is prominently or almost entirely hated by the general public and see if it deserves its bad reputation. Last time it was Bibleman, this time it's the 2004 break-even hit starring Kenan Thompson, Fat Albert. Now let's give a little bit of history. In the 1970s, Bill Cosby, who was still a really recognizable, well-loved comedian instead of the criminal he's recognized as today, but we're not going to talk about that, we're going to keep it in good standards. Anyway, he was still really, really popular, so they decided to give him a Saturday morning cartoon. But he didn't want to make it about himself, but he wanted to make it about his friends growing up. So he decided to adapt characters based off of all of his buddies that he grew up with in North Philadelphia, and then created Fat Albert and the Cosby Kids. The show went for about 6 seasons, and it was a fantastic hit at the beginning. Everybody loved it, everybody collected all the stuff, everyone was quoting it because even though they went with the bottom of the barrel film studio, Filmation, it was still really popular. And of course, because Bill Cosby was writing all the episodes, he had, or at least supervising all the writing, the jokes were still really well done despite the really poor quality animation and animation loops. The voice acting was still really, really good. One of the things that Filmation did was they recycled voice actors a lot, specifically Lou Scheimer, who was the CEO of the company. He voiced a couple characters, but honestly, they sound so different you can't tell. Like, he voices Dumb Donald for one. He gave him a little bit of an interesting voice, kind of making him sound a little like this, but it works with the character. And of course, there were musical segments that everybody loved because the music was really well done. However, towards the 3rd season, the show started to change. The music segments were gone, some of the voice actors were getting replaced, and there were new segments getting added, like the Brown Hornet. The Brown Hornet was always kind of a popular running theme, being their version of the Green Hornet and very popular superhero. But now he was getting his own segments, and in all honesty, I personally didn't like him very much, as I felt they were just kind of filler. But overall, it didn't really take away from what the show was. Still a really well-written, really well-thought-out show. But one of the things that Fat Albert really was meant to do was teach lessons. Not just because in this day and age all cartoons basically had to give messages, but Bill Cosby really did want to teach kids important values that he learned when he was growing up. And it was simple stuff sometimes, like lying, or not stealing, or being nice to people, but sometimes it was like coping with loss, or trying to find that good in bad circumstances, like best friends moving away. That episode is still really sad. Or avoiding strangers, or finding love for a new sibling, even like when you get a new sibling and you don't want one, you gotta still find love in them because they're still your family, stuff like that. As it went further down, it got a lot deeper and a lot more well thought out, and people were really liking it for that. Honestly, Fat Albert could have been going on for however long it wanted, but I guess Bill Cosby just thought it would be best to end it whenever it did, and I think it went really well. And of course, we have all the great characters: Fat Albert, Rudy, Weird Harold, Mushmouth, Dumb Donald, Bill, Russell. Bet you can't guess who they're based off of. You know, everybody like that. All the great 8 Junkyard Gang. So the series kind of went dormant for a while, and some talks of a spin-off show were being brought up. But no, they didn't decide to do that. But Bill Cosby was kind of wanting to return back to the Fat Albert roots. So what does he decide to do? He decides to write a screenplay. And then it gets picked up by 20th Century Fox, and then it gets released to not so good reviews and iffy box office returns. Yeah, for those wondering, Bill Cosby did write most of this movie. Why is that such a big shock? Well, you know how most cartoon to live action adaptations take kind of the bare basics of the story and then adapt it into a live action film? Fat Albert does not do that. Instead, it kind of goes the Enchanted route, although this came out a little bit before Enchanted, and brings the cartoon characters into real life and has them interact with today's society. A lot of people hated this, absolutely hated this, and in concept, it sounds really bad because a Fat Albert movie would work, an actual one, because Fat Albert was one of the most realistic cartoons, with the exception of an anthropomorphic duck that sometimes used, even though it couldn't talk. it was really realistic and really down to earth. If you just made a live action version of that, it would work. It wouldn't be something like Scooby-Doo or Yogi Bear where it just wouldn't be quite right. This would fit perfectly. And I think that's one of the reasons that people got so upset, is because of all the cartoons you could adapt into live action, this is one of them, and they decided not to do that. Instead, it's about a girl named Doris Robertson and her sister Lori. Lori is really popular and really well loved, while Doris is hated by everybody, and she feels really upset and neglected. So one day she feels really, really bad and then cries into the remote when she's watching Fat Albert, just to kind of de-stress and to have some background noise. But all of a sudden, Fat Albert hears her crying and feels bad for her because, you know, Fat Albert's a big-hearted guy and he wants to go solve all the problems in the world. And so everyone's trying to tell him, don't do it, don't do it, don't do it, but he jumps through the TV, and then everybody else comes out, except Russell. This is another thing that the movie gets kind of flack for. Russell gets nothing to do. For whatever reason, everybody else gets to come into the real world, but Russell stays in the junkyard. Maybe it's because the rival gang has to have somebody to go up against, but why not Mudfoot? You established him in the beginning, and you established that he's still there and is a good guy. Why not bring Russell in? Because Mudfoot's way less popular, but even still, you'd still give him something to do. But anyways, they all come in, and Doris is just trying to advertise them as just her friends, because of course no one would believe her if she says that they came out of the TV. But they're really struggling with coping with modern day technology. After all, they're from an era that was about 40 years ago. And they're really, really strange, and they're acting also like it's a TV world too, like saying hi to everybody that comes along, wearing bright, colorful clothes, still using the lingo, all that sort of stuff. However, they don't care. They just want to help Doris with her problem, but she wants nothing to do with them. Eventually, Fat Albert falls in love with her sister Lori and meets up with some of the bad kids at school, and then faces off with them. But they're still trying to balance Fat Albert's blooming relationship with Lori, which is actually kind of a nice one, but I'll get to that in a little bit, with also helping Doris's problem and a third problem that they find. See, because they're from the TV, they don't belong in this world. So if they stay out for too long, they're going to turn into dust. And you can tell because they keep fading away. This is actually kind of a decent concept for cartoons coming into the real world. It's not like the Smurfs where they just transform or go through all the different dimensions something. No, they just come out, but because they're from the TV world, they can't survive here. That's actually kind of a good concept. And does it work in execution? Yes and no. It works, yes, for story, but no for how they treat some of the characters. Yeah, let's get on to that. So there are some characters in here that get way more spotlight than others. We already know Russell, but there are two other characters that get just about nothing to do. Bucky and Weird Harold. Bucky is understandable because he was always the weakest of the characters. He never really had that much of a personality. He was kind of the weirdo and kind of the oddball, but it wasn't really utilized very much, and he didn't talk a lot. So they tried to give him a little bit more stuff to do in this one, and to be fair, he does more here than he does probably in the entirety of the cartoon. But still, he doesn't get to do a lot. And because he goes into the TV, back into the TV really early, it really doesn't help. The other one is Weird Harold, who was always my personal favorite. And they call him Old Weird Harold in this one for some reason. But anyways, he is kind of the slick guy who tries to act really cool, but he's a little bit clumsy and stuff, and that could really work. Unfortunately, he doesn't really get to do a whole lot. Next to Bucky, he gets the least to do. And again, he goes back into the TV extremely early. Dumb Donald does this too, but he gets a whole arc to do stuff with. So he gets a lot more attention, a lot more screen time. But with Weird Harold and Bucky, they don't. And that's just kind of disappointing. Especially because Weird Harold isn't just my favorite, but he's also a really popular one. Bucky, yeah, I can kind of see why he did that. And how's about the casting? The casting is really good. Although they don't sound a ton like the cartoon characters, it's understandable because it wouldn't sound quite right coming out of a normal human. Well, except for Fat Albert, because that voice was spot on. Kenan Thompson does a great job as Albert. Everybody else does a really good job too. Even though they don't really sound like the characters they're based off of, they still do a really good job playing the roles. The costuming is kind of strange. They get a lot of stuff perfectly right, but they do get some stuff wrong. Now, there's some minor things like pants being a different color and all that, but there are some interesting choices they decide to make. Like they give Weird Harold an afro for one. And they change Bill's shirt, which actually I kind of like because they give him a picture of the Brown Hornet, who isn't even really mentioned in this movie, so it's kind of a nice little Easter egg that they throw in. Which, this doesn't really bug me, but it's supposed to be the original Filmation cartoon that they're playing and that they come out of. And it just kind of makes it look a little strange. And another thing that's kind of strange is that the animation quality is amazing in that cartoon that they show in the movie, and is not even close to Filmation quality. What I think would have been cool, even though the animation was great, was to have kind of a Filmation-esque thing in there. It would have been a nice throwback, and it would have made it seem more like they actually were from the cartoon. Now let's get to the big one, the one that cartoon to live action always seem to mess up, the character portrayals. Let's go one by one and make sure that they got them all right. Russell, yes, they actually got him right. Russell is the whiny, annoying little brat that he was in the cartoon. Perfect. Fat Albert, I already said him, but, you know, he was spot on. Not just Keaton Thompson's voice for him, but also his portrayal and the way he was written. It's just like how he was in the cartoon. Weird Harold, for what he gets to do, he's just like he was in the show. Bucky, they kind of took a little bit more liberties with him, but only because Bucky was just kind of bland in the original. So they kind of gave him more to do and kind of explored his character and kind of took it at a little bit further levels. Bill, pretty much spot on. Bill was always kind of the voice of reason in the original, and in this one he's pretty much the same. But now we get to the last three, the ones that they really screwed up with. Rudy, Dumb Donald, and Mushmouth. Let's go in the order from how they messed him up least to most. Rudy in the cartoon was kind of an annoying brat, more so than Russell. Well, that's in a different way. Russell was just kind of the young little brother who was just kind of naturally a brat. Rudy was the self-entitled, rich snob who always felt like everything should be given to him on a silver platter and then should get special treatment. That kind of guy. He was kind of the most antagonistic of the Junkyard Gang. Sometimes he actually would be straight up the villain. Even though everyone likes him, they still really like to rag on him, too. That's another really important thing with Rudy. Everyone really rags on him, even though they kind of more rag on Bucky in this one. In this, he is kind of a second Bill, just with less of the voice of reason and a little bit more slightly pompous. He doesn't really act kind of nasty. He doesn't act really mean in this. He's just kind of a sweet, sensitive, caring guy, especially because he ends up getting a thing for Doris in this. Even though they don't really explore it very much, it's just kind of something that you pick up on. He's not really portrayed all that well, even though he's like the second main character in both the show and the movie, really. But, they mess up one character. We can get past that. Dumb Donald, one of the most popular of them. Yeah, they really messed him up too, but for a different reason. Flanderization. For those who don't know, Flanderization is taking one character trait of a character and then stretching it out to the point where that's their only character. Dumb Donald in the cartoon wasn't just dumb. He was also kind of, well, this kind of goes along with dumb but naive. He didn't know how things worked. He was kind of curious. He was also kind of a guy who did his own thing, sort of. In this, he's just the dumbest thing alive, which works sometimes and then doesn't, because he's the dumb guy, but because they're all in an environment that's not familiar to them, he doesn't seem dumber than the others. The only reason we know he's dumb is because they call him that. He just kind of blends in with what everybody else is doing. He doesn't seem dumber than any of the others. Until the last third, when we find out he can't even read, which is wrong for so many reasons, as he was seen reading earlier, and also has read in the cartoon many, many times before. But there is one joke with him I love, love, love. When he takes the hat off, because he wears a hat that covers his entire face, we finally see that he has a face, and he's surprised that he has a face, and he's running around screaming that he has a face, he has a face, he's so excited. That's funny. But then when he goes back into the TV, he has no face, he's just a floating pair of eyes and a body. And then they're all like, oh, well, he never had a face in the cartoon, so no one ever bothered to draw him a face. I always laugh really hard at that part, because it's a really good idea. But still, the character portrayal just doesn't work with him because they just kind of push the dumbness too far at some parts and then not at all at others. But the one that really gets under my skin, even when I first saw it as a little kid, Mushmouth. So Mushmouth has always kind of talked a little bit like this, but because of his overbite, man, you can understand him, and everyone else does too. But in the movie, he speaks a different language, even though he just kind of goes instead of kind of going a little bit like this, but maybe like that. And the only one who can understand him is Weird Harold. My guess is that they did this to give Harold a little bit more to do, but it doesn't really work. It doesn't really amount to very many funny differences. I mean, it would have been just as funny, if not even funnier sometimes, to have Mushmouth talk like he did in the cartoon, and to not give Weird Harold the pointless translator thing, because even though that they try to give him more to do with that, it still amounts to nothing, especially because Mushmouth talks normal in the last third. And they even have a deleted scene where he says, oh, he likes Harold and all, but he's happy to just be kind of free on his own. You were free already in the cartoon. This is the only time you were ever... forget it. Which, this is kind of unexcusable too, because Bill Cosby wrote most of this, remember? Maybe this was some of the executives' ideas to kind of change this, but I know Bill Cosby was really proud of everything in this movie, so I know that that's probably not the case. In fact, he even appears in it. So yeah, the character portrayal is kind of wonky. And how does the rest of the movie? Well, in all honesty, I like this movie. I really do. I mean, yes, I can totally see how you could not like it. Absolutely. This movie is far from perfect. There's a really corny, cheesy rap number in this that's a remix of the Fat Albert theme, sort of, kind of. And it comes out of nowhere and kind of amounts to nothing, but it's a guilty pleasure of mine. The stuff with Doris actually is really, really well done, and you can kind of feel for her. And you can also see just how much of a shadow she's in with her sister. And the stuff with Albert and Laurie is actually really good too. And where Albert kind of almost dies at the very end, that's another really nice scene. And one of the best scenes in the movie is just where he talks with Bill Cosby. First of all, it starts with a great joke because Fat Albert's used to Bill Cosby being kind of the young version of him. So he knocks on Bill's door, and of course Bill's an old man now, so he's like, I'm looking for Mr. Cosby. You his dad? And then he just faints. I thought that was really funny. But then the next scene he has talking with Cosby is actually a really nice scene. They explain where the Fat Albert character came from and what he's supposed to be doing and why he was created, that kind of stuff. It kind of gives you a little bit of a reason why he has a connection with these people. The heart is really good in this. It really captures a lot of those darker, deeper episodes of the original Fat Albert cartoon. Speaking of recapturing the cartoon, I noticed something upon rewatching this. See, Filmation was notorious for doing animation loops and voice loops. In other words, they would take a sequence of animation and voice track and just replay it over and over again, with sometimes different backgrounds. If you look carefully, during some of the crowd scenes with Fat Albert and the gang, or even sometimes where they're just agreeing, you can see them kind of imitating those loops and sound bits. They're not exactly the same, but you can kind of see it. That's a nice little thing in there. I'd never noticed that. They also keep a lot of the same jokes like the, you're just like a school on Saturday, no class, that kind of stuff. They keep all the running jokes in there. They keep the writing style very similar to the cartoon, even though they're in a completely different environment. And yes, they do a lot of those jokes where they're like, DVD? What's a DVD? Oh, sorry, we think it's Divida. Some of the jokes don't work, but a lot of them I find do. Specifically the ones where they're at the mall. The mall scene is probably that, or the scene with Albert and Laurie or Cosby. Those are some of the best. This is probably the funniest scene in the movie. Especially where Fat Albert and Bucky go clothes shopping, and Fat Albert gets all these clothes, and then he ends up realizing he has no money, and that he refuses to try any of the clothes because he doesn't want to take off his sweater because he doesn't know what's underneath it. There's some good jokes in there and a lot of really good writing. But the heart of the movie really helps carry it. But it is a little off-putting because the premise was getting a little cliched. Now, it did it before it was cliched, but coming up after this, and especially Enchanted, a lot of people were trying to do this, and a lot of people were trying to kind of capture it, which really hurt Fat Albert in the long run. Although I do like this movie, I will admit there are a lot of faults that I just mentioned. And also the pacing can get a little off sometimes. Sometimes a scene will really be taking its time, and then the next couple scenes will just speed by, and then it'll be taking its time and dragging along a little bit, and then it'll go really fast again. It's kind of inconsistent with that, but overall, I like this movie. Some parts are guilty pleasure, but some parts are genuine liking. If you're at all curious, again, I'd suggest going and seeing it. Because I'm pretty much going to guarantee you're going to find at least one part in this movie you're going to like. Would I like to see a real Fat Albert movie? Absolutely. I think it would have been a great idea. And it's not going to happen now because Fat Albert, the show, never gets played on TV anymore, and its creator has gotten some reputations and allegations, but we're not going to talk about that here. Ultimately, a Fat Albert spin-off TV show was going to happen, not based off of this, but in 2013, they did talk about reviving the show, and it was going to be kind of like the animated portions we saw here. It's going to have that kind of quality of animation while still having the writing and lovable spirit of the original 70s cartoon. That was going to be great. Unfortunately, that's never going to happen now, for obvious reasons. And neither will a Fat Albert movie, most likely. If it does, by some miracle, we know it's not going to have the original guy on board, so we're going to need some really talented writers to help pull it off. But I think it's best that we don't at this point. Cartoons to live action movies have been at an all-time low when it comes to both interest and profit. And I just don't think the market's there for it anymore. We've moved on to other shows, like 90s cartoons. That's what a lot of people are remembering now. And of course, shows that are on now, like Steven Universe or what used to be Gravity Falls. Fat Albert's not nearly as popular as it was back then, because it was still really popular and really well remembered in the 2000s. But not anymore now. Now it's just kind of forgotten. I mean, I still love it, but I'm definitely not one of them who really keeps up with a lot of modern stuff, to be fair, though. So, do you guys want to see Fat Albert? Did you ever see it? What'd you think of it? If so, comment below and let me know. Alright, I'll see you guys later. Hey, have a good day.